Okay, so let's do this for a moment. I don't know when we did this. Some a video of Matt Walsh. This is the guy from the Daily Wire.
Oh, is he the minimum wage guy?
The minimum wage guy. And this is, I refer to him as like the not funny Matt Walsh, because I know Matt Walsh, who is actually successful and funny, and he's an actor and a comedian. He was a used to be guy. And this is the not funny Matt Walsh. And we did a video about, I guess a video he did on the minimum wage. And a listener sent this to us. I guess, I don't know why it took so long. I don't know when he did this on his show, maybe a couple of weeks ago or something. And so he apparently was very upset because he felt like I was just mocking him the whole time. Like we did like something like a 20-minute video on him, and he said that Sam says
apathetically steamrolled him?
Yeah, Sam says I'm irrelevant, but he spent 20 minutes on me making fun of us. And I just want to be, this is more of like a general show note. We do 3 hours a day, and when I see someone out there who is saying something stupid about the minimum wage, that doesn't mean that I think you're relevant. It just means that I think your point was stupid and you're just copying some right-wing talking point, and you're a good vehicle for me to discuss it. We're not on the Matt Walsh's turning people beat here. I want to make that clear.
Definitely did not remember this guy's anything until today's sound sheet.
I know that he talks a lot about abortion. That's the only thing that I associate him with.
I just remember, I remember the minimum wage stuff.
But
it's like people should have babies who
and
don't
let me
get
just
paid
preface
for their
this
jobs.
with this, because this is going to get a little bit weedy, because he was very, very upset that all we did was make fun of him, saying that his work was worthless, that it looked like he didn't prepare.
Did we do the hacky, well, we do support the minimum wage, but if anybody's not going to get paid for their work, maybe it should be this guy.
Well, no, he was trying to make the argument that you are always paid what you're worth. That's what happens, and the minimum wage is wrong. And I was suggesting that what you deserve, you're always paid what you deserve and what you're worth to the employer. And I was suggesting like, no, I think the work you're doing is an example that you don't get paid what you're worth, assuming you get paid anything. And
maybe he doesn't. Maybe it's an elaborate internship.
It's possible. And then he was upset. He was upset that I compared him to my 14-year-old daughter, and he said that was rude of me to do to my daughter. And that's probably true, because there's times where I think she's more astute than this guy. But my point was daughter, son, any junior high student, and I have to maybe amend this, early junior high, like more like 6th or 7th grade as opposed to like 8th grade, when things get a little more sophisticated. So and then he complained because we didn't really address his argument. And so let's play some clips from this, but this is going to get a little bit weedy. This is such a basic concept that I didn't think I'd have to do it, but Matt believes that workers get paid exclusively based upon their value to an employer. In other words, how much do they make for the employer? So let's just keep that in mind. Let's listen to what he's saying here.
Probably someone who's going to be fired. That's someone who's not going to have a job anymore. So Sam is exactly right about that.
Oh, so apparently, I think that was like where Matt also thinks that you can make theoretically zero as an employee, but if you're not making any money, then you're not really an employee. Now, that's a sticking point, but it's relevant, because having a job is not just about like, well, it is, you're setting aside your labor as a commodity, and you're also having to deliver that and provide for it to the employer. But go ahead.
I think he's getting it. Maybe he's catching on. The people who are on the minimum wage, the real minimum wage in this scenario, are probably going to be the people who mostly don't have jobs. They have zero worth to any employer Thus, they have no job. Thus, their wage, in effect, is zero. And that's the starting point. Okay? The least amount you can be worth to an employer is nothing.
Pause
Right?
it. No, wrong. Because if you're worth nothing to an employer, you're not an employee. They're not an employer. This is a relationship between two people. I don't walk around in my life as an employer.
You do. It's very confusing. I've seen you at.
People don't say to me, like, and I go into the supermarket, well, there's one of our employers.
I've had some coffees with Sam, and it's so bizarre where he just will look up and say, "You offered nothing to the
This is
organization."
important because he
No one
doesn't
gets it.
understand what work is. And he doesn't understand how employers, when they are employing people, make assessments about their worth. And continue.
Least amount you can be worth to an employer is nothing. Right? What's hard to understand about this? Have you ever heard of the concept of zero, Sam? It's possible to be worth nothing to an employer. For instance, right now, as an employee, I am worth nothing to Subway because I don't work for them. So I get paid zero from them. I'm worth nothing to them. My wage from them is zero.
What?
All right. What I'm saying is that a minimum wage of $15. Now, I know it's.
But, and I know I'm not supposed to make fun of him on this, but he's doing this from notes. He's doing this all from notes.
The old "we all work for everybody and nobody" argument.
What I'm saying is that a minimum wage of $15. Now, I know it's an obvious point, but so you might say, why am I bringing it up? Well, because people like Sam struggle with it. So I feel like I have to, he's someone on a remedial level here, which is fine. I'm not making fun of him, but so I've got to just slow down and spell this out for him. What I'm saying is that a minimum wage of $15 an hour doesn't make sense because it commands really that every person who has a job must necessarily be worth at least $15 an hour to their employer just by the fact that they exist and they walked in the door. I don't think that's the case. So Sam, of course, goes for another personal dig there, as you saw, says that I'm worth zero to my employer. But again, not an argument. That's just an insult, a lame one. And here's the thing, Sam, it's also not accurate.
It was actually kind of funny.
Because I'm not worth zero to my employer. I'm not even worth zero to you because you're using me for content.
That's true. All right. Well, look, I don't know. The basic problem that Matt has is that he assumes that wages are set based upon the value that the worker produces for the employer. And if that was the case, if that was the only thing, now obviously, I'm not going to hire workers unless I think they're going to provide value to my business. That's obvious. But if it was the case that there was some type of very specific algorithm that a worker has to produce X and they are worth Y to me, then you wouldn't see things like this chart. This chart is the gap between productivity and a typical worker's compensation. That gap has increased significantly since 1973. Now, let me just, before we go into this, just make it clear. You'll see that as you go up to like 1973 this starts in 1947. That dynamic is used as the baseline. There is necessarily a delta between the difference between what a worker's productivity is and what their compensation is. This is ultimately, out of that chunk of money comes paying for capital improvements, paying for technology, paying the rent, paying for the goods that come in, and then profit. Now, your rent may be fixed. Your systems costs may be fixed to some degree. Maybe you can improve the efficiencies. The investment you have to make in your equipment may be more or less fixed. your labor costs, maybe you can fudge those, and your profit. Okay? Now, so understand, even though it looks like these two lines are equal, there's still that's just because it's indexed to 1947.
Well, maybe the workers just got lazy starting around 1973.
Well, if that was the case in 1973, you would not see productivity continue to rise in the same fashion. However, hourly compensation goes flatline there while productivity goes up. So that delta grew significantly during that period of time. Now, which is not to say that there wasn't a delta before then, but again, it was static because it's indexed at 1947. But just the existence of the ability of hourly compensation versus the productivity to change disproves all of Matt Walsh's theory that you are paid what you are worth to an employer, because the value of those employees did not go down from 1973 until 17, when that chart was finished. It continued to go up. In fact, I think it went up slightly steeper than it had gone before, which means that productivity got even more efficient and there was even more productivity. But compensation barely budged.
Sam, I do have a question for you, though. What would you say the relative value you're providing as an employee to North End Motor Sales?
I would say
it's a used car dealership in Worcester.
0.
Right.
Right.
So you can kind of see how that's sort of a tension of what we're saying.
So he doesn't understand this concept that it's really just a question of how much profit. Now, there are instances, of course, where you run a business where you're barely taking any profit whatsoever, and a minimum wage, you can't exploit, you can't create that much of a delta, as much of a delta as you want between the productivity of your workers and what you pay them. There are businesses like that. Now, of course, what is also problematic with those is things like your rent. Maybe your rent is actually the problem here. Maybe your other fixed costs, or maybe you have a bad business idea, or maybe you don't have access to other forms of capital.
But the point is, you shouldn't be allowed to ship that onto your workers.
And not only that, which is true, but we know that the minimum wage, as it has been historically there, has been able to create productivity and economic growth in the past. Here is where the value of the minimum wage. Well, here, do the other one, that one, yeah. So if you go back to the 1960s, you will see here from this chart that the minimum wage kept pace with where the economy was. And then starting somewhere probably around that same time, 1970 some odd, it dips. It doesn't keep pace with productivity. This is just another way of looking at that same chart, except for instead of this being the delta between productivity and compensation, now we're just looking at it relative to the minimum wage. If the minimum wage was maintained from where it was last in 1968, the minimum wage has been around since 1938, I think it was, and has been raised periodically, maybe about a dozen times over the years. If it had kept pace with productivity, in other words, if that dynamic, which worked for so many years, from 1944 in this chart, I guess, through to 1973 worked. And I would remind you, we had great, massive economic expansion during that period of time, and we had it broadly shared, at least amongst white people.
Largely due to wars, but it's beside the point.
Well, there was also just a broadening of the middle class. You could argue that's a function of like the rest of the world rebuilding. There's an argument you could make for a bunch of those things. But that starts going south in 1968, I guess it was, where you start to see the minimum wage not keeping nearly at the pace of what productivity is. And let's look at the other chart, which again just simply proves the point that there is no dynamic where an employer says like, well, you're worth $12 to me in terms of my revenue here. And therefore I'm going to pay you 10. We're always going to have a dynamic of 5/6. That's the iron law of compensation. You're going to get, I'm going to get, you're going to get 5/6 of the productivity that you make. And the problem with that is that that's a fantasy. It doesn't exist because we have seen evidence that it has moved instead of 5/6 to 5/7,
Again,
5/8, 5/9.
Oh my God.
Just to be intellectually honest and fair, how we correlate this, though, with the fact that, no offense, Brendan, that Brendan is worth nothing to McDonald's as an employee right now. So how do we sort of figure out that tension?
Here's another way of looking at that same thing. The ratio of minimum wage to average hourly wage for private production and non-supervised works. It has basically steadily dropped significantly over the years. Now, it bumps up in times of economic peril. 2008, you can see there's a little jag there, but still significantly less than it was in the late 40s. So there it is. I mean, there it is with statistics. This is not for Matt Walsh. This is for everyone else who has a more than just passing rudimentary notion, junior high school notion of how people are paid. In his earlier video, and I noticed he didn't address this here, maybe we missed it. He said, if you work at McDonald's and you do a really good job, you'll get a raise. As if there are people, do we have that? Oh, okay. Let's see.
Oh, there's more.
How much, how much you're worth to your employer. My contention about that fast food worker is that based on the effort and the skill he brings to the table, his financial worth to his employer is minimal. And the reason it's minimal is that almost anyone could do what he does. Almost anyone could replace him. They could fire him, and there's a 99% chance that whoever walks in the door next, however old they are, they could be 6 years old, they could do what that guy does. So he's just not worth that much financially to his employer. And importantly here, the automated things that McDonald's, that they already have set up, that thing can do what that guy does and do it better, actually. Now, that could change. Here's the good news. He has the power to change it. He could come to work tomorrow, energetic, on the ball, helpful, involved, engaged, on time, ready to work, making the customers feel good, upselling, doing all this stuff. He could do that tomorrow, and instantly, just like that, in an instant, he could be worth considerably more than $1 an hour.
Pause it. Last week we had on the show a woman who spent time working at Amazon, working at McDonald's, working at a call center, and she wrote the book. What was the name? What was the?
On the Clock.
On the Clock.
Emily Gundelsberger.
Can I fit anything else into this box? I just want to upsell it.
She worked at McDonald's, and there is no. First of all, not only instantaneously do you become not more worth to your employer? The last thing an employer would do, like, you know what, yesterday you were lazy. Today you're great. I'm giving you a raise to do the same job. That doesn't happen at McDonald's. It doesn't happen at all at McDonald's. It doesn't happen over time at McDonald's. There's no two people working the fry-olator and who have been working there for the same time, and one's getting paid more. That's not the way it works at McDonald's. And it's also not the case that they're paying just for the skill set. They're paying based upon how much labor is available to me, not the quality of it. How much labor is available to me that can do this, and how much control do I have, monopsony, over their wages? One of the big dynamics that we have that's problematic in this country, and I know this is a little bit far afield from minimum wage, is that we have such concentration of corporate power in this country. You have fewer firms starting up, far less employers, and what happens is you get single buyers for labor in localities and to some extent nationally, and that drives down wages, which again is more proof that wages are not a function of the value you bring. Yes, there is a baseline that you have to bring in terms of value to someone to get hired, but wages are not merely a function of the value you bring to the employer. There's a lot of other factors. So his whole argument about why a minimum wage is wrong is fallacious.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. There's nothing worse than unearned pedantry.
Indeed. Indeed.